Hello everybody, it's a real pleasure for me to be here today and to talk at this prestigious conference about a subject that I'm really passionate about, mass timber and its increasing uptake in tall buildings and cities of the future. I'd just like to say at the beginning that we're at the start of quite a significant research project that's been funded by the USDA, the US Forest Service, and the Binational Softwood Lumber Council. And so a lot of what I'm going to be showing you today is a result of this research project that we're undertaking. Okay, so first questions. Why timber? Why tall? I'm aware that today I'm probably preaching to the converted. I'm probably going to be talking about mass timber. Many of you will know mass timber in more detail than I do at a technical level. But I really want to start by emphasizing that I think the industry, we, have too quickly taken for granted that everybody knows why mass timber is so important to the future of our inhabitation of this planet. And I think we've forgotten that we need to be continually reinforcing the story. And you know, the reaction that my children had when I first told them about this 2 or 3 years ago, a few years ago, is still the reaction that I have, even from people in the building industry around the world. And that reaction was, Dad, you can't cut down trees, you know? And I think, you know, from a sustainability viewpoint, it's a little bit like don't use elevators in the event of a fire. It's a culture that is ingrained in humanity. And, you know, and we forget that at our peril, that it's not naturally instinctive as to why cutting down trees to build buildings, you know, is a good thing. So I think that, you know, the opening slides, why timber and why tall buildings, is important in terms of reinforcing the reasons. So, you know, as we all know, there are 3 main reasons why mass timber is a good thing. Speed and cost in the building industry. I'm not going to talk too much about that today because I think that's pretty well understood. 2, sustainability. And then 3, the human connection to this material. So the speed and cost equation. You know, there's numerous case studies already that kind of show this, but 2 fairly dramatic ones. You know, this project in Austria, only 8 floors, but basically the construction of the structural frame made water and air tight on this project took 8 days. It's got a concrete core, which took a little bit longer, but taking that out of the equation, we're talking a floor per day achieving water and air tightness. And you know, and a bit closer to home, this seminal project, which you will all know, Brock Commons, it's estimated that this was completed on site 4 months faster than a traditional concrete or steel framed building. Now, 4 months might not sound like a lot, but 4 months over 18 floors is quite significant. And if we are in the future going to start to see these buildings go to 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 stories, and I believe we are, and we should, then think about that 4 month saving on a typical, you know, 50 or 60 story tall building timeline. That's, you know, we're now talking about a year or more. We're talking about a year or more of savings on loans, on construction costs, on materials, all these things. That's a significant speed and cost saving. You know, sustainability equation. I've already said that, you know, the act of cutting down trees for many people is anti-sustainable. It's the last thing that we should do. So the way that I describe this back to my children and to others in the industry is that, you know, as far as I'm concerned, mass timber is an absolute game changer. It's a game changer because right up to this moment, right up to the last 5-10 years, you know, the act of building has been an unsustainable proposition. You'll hear architects say the most sustainable building is one that doesn't have to be built. Well, that's helpful. You know, that's why timber is a game changer, because up to now, our conversation around materials, our conversation around buildings and putting people in buildings is about minimizing the amount of material used and minimizing the environmental effect of really building. Well, mass timber changes that, because not only does timber not need energy to produce it, unlike concrete, steel, and most building materials, it quite happily produces itself without much help from us, as long as it's got soil and sunlight and water. So not only does it not require us to give it energy and therefore produce carbon and other greenhouse gases in its production, it actually sequesters carbon out of the atmosphere whilst it's producing itself, such that, you know, at the end of the day, the tree is approximately 50% carbon. And of course, younger trees sequester more carbon than older trees, like us. They're more active in the younger periods of their growth. So the concept of cutting down a tree, using it as a building product, and then crucially planting a new tree. In other words, we're now farming building materials, is really, really, you know, the essence of the sustainability equation around mass timber. And that's what changes the whole proposition of buildings. Because now the act of building more buildings in timber is actually helping to improve the environment. And that's why I feel it's a game changer. But of course, it needs to be in the context of the sustainably managed forest. You know, it's no use cutting down a tree and then not replanting another tree. There's many other benefits to this as well. You know, what we've seen on the west coast of America and in Australia and many other, you know, parts of the world in terms of increasing forest fire, largely due to, you know, the kind of fuel that is kind of built up around the base. The sustainably managed forest has many other benefits beyond just, you know, creating building products more sustainably. So you know, the granddaddy of the mass timber high-rise building, Stadthouse in London, just look at this statistic. Instead of a traditional framed building creating 125,000 kilograms of carbon in its creation to build this building, the mass timber frame actually stored and took out of the atmosphere 185,000 kilograms of carbon. So that really shows that, you know, that equation that I've just said with real data. But there's a third benefit to mass timber. And I'm going to be honest, if there's one thing that I'm disappointed with many projects in North America, and I realize that this is a controversial statement, is the fact that many of these projects, you'd go and visit them and you'd have no inkling that it's a mass timber building, because the mass timber is covered up with drywall because of predominantly the fire challenge. And I think this really denies the equal benefit of mass timber. To me, this is of equal benefit and possibly even more benefit from a commercial viewpoint than the sustainability and carbon equation. And that is the fact that people love the connection to this natural material. You know, it's a natural material. And not only do they love the connection to see having this material all around them, but data has been shown that it has a direct financial, commercial return, especially in office spaces, because happier people inside these environments are more productive. So, you know, a study was done here by Gallup a few years ago, which showed that people that are you know, happier in their workspaces, it can result in a 41% drop in absenteeism, 59% drop in turnover, i.e. people changing companies, and a 17% increase in productivity. And if we can get that across to our clients and developers, owner developers, that look, this is not just saving the planet, but you create this internal environment, it's going to increase everybody's mental health and well-being and actually increase your productivity, then this really is a win-win-win situation. It's a win on speed and cost, it's a win on sustainability, carbon and environmentalism, and it's a win in the internal environment, wellness, so important, and productivity. You know, and we see this great project, I guess, mid-rise office building in Brisbane, Australia, that became Queensland's first platinum building for a whole bunch of reasons, but not least because of the amount of exposed timber that's in that project. Okay, so that's the basis. That's the why timber, why tall. And I realize that a lot of you will know that already. Let me just tell you what we at the Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat have been doing recently in the mass timber sphere, if you like. By the way, if you don't know anything about our organization, we are the world's if you like, trade association for all those involved in the design, construction and operation of tall buildings, and increasingly future cities. It's getting, as I'm going to show in the rest of this presentation, it's getting less and less about a single tall building and more about the collective benefits of urban density in cities as a whole. So we have more than 2 million people plugged into our network around the whole world. We are multidisciplinary. You can see in the slides here, about a quarter of our membership is the owner, developer, funder, occupier, engineers, architects, construction, material and systems suppliers and vendors. And for an organization that started in the US, 62% of our membership is now outside North America and around the whole globe. You can see that globe according to us. We have offices in Chicago, Italy and China, and we also have more than a dozen formal affiliated chapters in other countries and representatives throughout the whole world. So we started really taking mass timber quite seriously, getting on for about 10 years ago now, because we just started to see this huge interest from the industry in mass timber. So we formed our first working group, perhaps not surprisingly, out of Europe. 8-9 years ago, 2014 was the formalization of it. But we were seeing, we captured the news every day and put this on our website, and we're starting to see more and more projects connected with mass timber. We were getting submissions for our journal, more and more papers connected with mass timber. Again, 6, 7, 8 years ago. Our chapters around the world were starting to focus their events on mass timber. One of the things that we do, the Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat, we are the body that sets the title of the world's tallest building, or Chicago's tallest residential building with a concrete offset core, or any manner of different permutations. And one of the things that we started to see and started to get flack for was all these competing claims for the tallest timber building in the world. This is like, 8 years ago, where we found that we were not necessarily, or the architects and the teams behind these schemes were not necessarily comparing apples to apples. We had all timber. We had timber with a concrete core. We had timber with a lateral steel floor system. And so it was not surprising that there was confusion on this, because our height criteria at that time didn't even include timber as a material. Why would it? There'd not been anything, above whatever, X stories that had really been built out of timber for a long time, at least. And so one of the early things that we did is we convened the height committee together, and we introduced timber into our height criteria material. So you can see here, I'm not going to read it out, but timber became an official building structural material alongside steel, concrete and composite as a criteria embraced timber into it. Timber steel composite, timber concrete composite, whereas in the past it had only been steel and concrete composites. That was an important moment for our organization, and I would argue for mass timber in the tall building industry. And that then led us to confidently, a few years later, just 2 years ago, recognize this project, Mjøstårnet, I hope I've said that right, in Norway, as the tallest all-timber project in the world. And that's our chairman on the right-hand side there, going over and recognizing this with the installation of a signboard at the project. This is the history of the tallest timber or timber composite building in the world. It lasts 12 years, and there are 5 projects in it. But when I look at this, and maybe I could have shown this today, this looks very much like the birth of the tall building at the late 19th century between Chicago and New York. And what you're looking at there is the tripling of height in a 10-year period. Between 2009, Stadthouse in London, and 2019, the project in Norway, we're seeing a tripling of height. And of course, if that continues, then where will we be in another 10 years' time? The future tallest 10 timber buildings are shown on the screen now. And by future, we mean projects that are either complete now or are currently under construction. There's a lot of proposals out there which are great, but this tallest 10 as we see it, timber or timber composite, is based on what's under construction or complete now. So you'll see the fantastic projects in Milwaukee. Ascent will be the tallest, it will overtake Mirstona when it completes, and then we've got Ho in Vienna, Hout, and then others beyond that. Okay, so I want to just tell you briefly about the timber research project that we've got underway with the USDA and Binational, Southwood Lumber Council. The council, we've been around for 51 years. We do research into all aspects of cities, you know. These are some of the reports from the past few years. If we dial this back to a word, you will see that we undertake huge scale studies on the economics of megacities, right down to detailed technical studies on green walls or outriggers or things like this. So we undertake this breadth of research. And this project that we're working on now is really quite exciting. We started it 3 or 4 months ago. I'm telling you about this, by the way, because I'm hoping that people in the audience will want to get involved in this project. We've already got more than 50 people sat on the steering panel, and this is the strength of the council. When I say people, I mean from every industry. We've got, you know, Sidewalk Labs, Hines, Lend-Lease. We've got the owner developers that are driving these buildings through the architects, engineers, suppliers. Everybody is a part of this panel. I want to call out Jeff Spiritos, who's chairing the panel, the steering panel for the research. But what is this project about? Okay, so the first thing is we're undertaking, and maybe this is obvious, but an international audit of the very best practice in all aspects of mass timber. Now, maybe that seems obvious, but I don't know that this study has been done at the level that it needs to happen, because here's my take on this. There's pockets of excellence in mass timber happening around the whole world. But the Australians are doing it a certain way. The Scandinavians are doing it a slightly different way. Central Europeans are doing it a different way. Japanese have been doing this for 2,000 years. The Canadians are doing it slightly differently. The Americans are doing it slightly differently. And when I say doing it, I mean, you know, the connection details, or the systems of the mass timber, or how it's structurally applied, or the fire challenge, or the acoustic challenges, or the moisture challenges, or what, you know, everybody's doing it a slightly different way. Well, what's the best practice? What's the best way to do it? What's the best way to do it, not just now, but in the future? So that's what this project is looking to do. It's to do this international audit and pick out what are the very best practices in all aspects of mass timber. We're going to do that through taking case studies and, crucially, getting to real data. If this project ends up being yet more anecdotal stuff about how wonderful mass timber is, we will have failed. We don't want yet more anecdotal stuff. We want real data connected to these case studies. Real data meaning, you know, well, how far did, what's the travel miles from the tree to actually, you know, being used on site? What was the real amount of carbon sequestered? What was that absenteeism in projects that have now been around for drop in absenteeism or productivity for projects that have been around for 10 years. You know, so the point is to get into case studies and get into real data as far as we can to prove some of these points that I'm guessing many people in the audience instinctively believe, but it hasn't moved beyond the anecdotal. So we will be producing a major publication, what we call the C2H Technical Guide, which will produce all this analysis and basically make recommendations. But we're not stopping there. We're going to be moving into a phase 2 where we apply that learning to the design of a hypothetical future city entirely out of timber. And I'm not talking Sidewalk Labs up in Toronto, brilliant though that project was. I'm meaning an entire city of 1 million people to really show what would be the benefits of mass timber beyond the single building if we really took that game changer to another level. And ultimately, this project is aimed at influencing the industry with a particular emphasis on North America because of the funders, though it will be an international study, and influencing the decision makers, the funders, the owner, the developers, the insurance agents industry. Wow, what a problem that is right now. To really get a more major take-up and a more ambitious way forward for mass timber in cities. We're already tracking, there are 75 projects right now over 25 meters in height around the world, mass timber projects, either complete, under construction, or serious proposals. You can see a breakdown of them there. 54% are in Europe, 42% are residential, 21% are office, which is perhaps surprising in itself. So, the early stages of this project is already bringing, some interesting findings. Okay, let's switch gears for a second, because we've talked quite a bit about mass timber. I want to bring in some other things here, which for us at the council, for me personally, are really quite important. So let's look at where tall buildings and cities are heading and think how mass timber can fit into that. So this is a study that we do every year. It looks at the number of tall buildings that are completed every year at different height strata, but what I'm presenting to you here are the number of buildings 200 meters or greater that are completed around the world each year. And the blue here are super tall buildings, meaning 300 meters or taller. So I think the key finding here that as recently as the 1990s, which was not that long ago, the whole world was building about 12 of these projects per year. And now the world is building, on average, in the last decade, 112 of these buildings per year. There's been a huge increase in the number of tall buildings being built around the whole world. And of course, a very, very small percentage, in fact, none of these are mass timber because it's a higher height threshold. But we see this as being the market for tall buildings into the future. However, that's good. That's a good thing. Here's the not good thing. And I got to be careful how I say this, but no, I don't need to be careful. Here's how I would say it. I think 95% of these buildings are terrible pieces of design. This is what I call the shortfall of tall. And I'll tell you why, because most of them are designed to one of two ways. This is the commercial design approach. And this project here from the 1950s, seminal piece of modern architecture, Mies van der Rohe, New York, Seagram building. Okay, 70 years later, God, don't most tall buildings still look like this? The rectilinear, air-conditioned box totally divorced from context. Why? Because it was such a great commercial animal that it got hijacked and supplanted into thousands of places around the world. I think, and the problem is that this is homogenizing cities around the world. I think high-rise architecture deserves to be more than just a commercial, utilitarian container. So shortfall number one, overtly commercial. Shortfall number two, the iconic sculptural design approach. So the tall building is now designed as a piece of sculpture and plonked down in the city to be beholden. I am beautiful, behold me. And that's the only relationship between the building and the city, is a visual one. And the problem with that is it may result in more interesting form, but you can pick that building up and put it anywhere. It's not actually related to place in the way that architecture should be. And by place, I mean culturally, physically, environmentally, climatically. These projects are just fairly gratuitous pieces of sculpture. And unfortunately, this results in this, which is it a city? By the way, this was a real proposal. Fortunately, it was never built. But, it's not a city. It's a menagerie, is it not? It's a zoo. It's a zoo of competing icons. So, I believe that we need to move away from both just the commercial exploitation of tall buildings, but also the gratuitous, sculptural, ridiculous form direction that some buildings have taken over the last 10, 20 years. Because it is leading to this homogenization of cities. And just because you might recognize a building or a skyline and you can say, oh, that's wherever, does not mean that it's born of that city. It just means it's become synonymous with it. It isn't linked to that city physically, socially, culturally, climatically in the way I've described. And I am always drawn to this image of a city that's now more than 400 years old in Yemen, Shibam in Yemen. This was a tall city when it was built. It was an incredibly dense city, still is. And there are no two buildings that are the same there. But there is a commonality about that city, which is beautiful. This is not competing icons. You know, there's a commonality, there's a humanity about that image, and we have lost that with our cities. One of the key things that there is a commonality about that city is because it's all built of the same material. It's all built of the same material, and it's a local material. They couldn't mine materials in China and ship them to Germany for fabrication and deliver them on site in the US. It was a local material. It was mud. Well, this is one of the key benefits for me with mass timber is mass timber can be produced locally from local species and get back that vernacular, material vernacular that links the building to its place. You know, and you can see that in some of the projects that have already happened. They're built out of a local material, local timber. But it's more than just the materials. In the future, so I talk about the 95% of tall buildings as being, perhaps lacking in design terms. I want to show you some of the projects that are in the 5%. And the thing that links these projects together is they take on responsibilities beyond just the building itself. They take on wider urban and social responsibilities and create something that's quite incredible. So this is a project in Milan, in Italy, Bosco Verticale, literally the vertical forest. 2 residential towers bedecked with vegetation, with real trees and bushes, and it just looks like a vertical forest. Real projects. I'm only showing you real projects. In the same way that the science behind mass timber is proven, the science behind buildings and cities out of vegetation is also proven. There are 20 major benefits. And you see that, not least, I would argue, the aesthetic benefit as well. This is a project that looks like it's tackling the challenges of our age rather than some of the commercial and sculptural projects that I showed a little while ago. But of course, there's a great potential symbiosis between timber and vertical greenery. So, in the future, I'm hoping that this is going to be pushed more, where we start to, that connection to the natural material of timber in the structure and expression of the building goes forward into live timber, meaning vegetation in the buildings as well. But what if we went a stage further? What if that wasn't just vegetation? What if it was vegetables? What if it was productive? What if it was fruit? And this is a project in Japan that does exactly that. It doesn't just sequester carbon and filter bad things in the environment and produce oxygen and produce habitat for small insect and animal species and all the other benefits. It's productive. It produces vegetables and fruit which are eaten in the office building, in the canteen. So we can push this even further. One of the failings of tall buildings, or one of the crazy things about tall buildings for me, is how we build them out of all glass and then waste more energy to cover up the glass when we didn't have to build them out of all glass to begin with. This was another problem with the modern movement, this idea of a universal glass and steel architecture. We don't have to do that. And if we introduced opacity into facades, then we'd get a chance for greater aesthetic expression as well. Maybe that's an extreme example that you're seeing on your screens now, but you get the idea. And again, this for me is a fantastic potential for timber. So when I'm saying we need to expose the timber, I'm not just talking internally. There are projects now, this 18-story project in Norway, which are clad in timber. And I'll never forget the owner of this project speaking at our conference, and before the project was complete, and someone in the audience just amazed that they could clad an 18-story project in timber. Because I think we were all sat there thinking, well, you'll have to get up there every 18 months with a bucket of creosote and reapply this to the timber. And the owner said, yes, we will have to get up there after 25 years. But that's to check that the fire retardant in the material is still working. We have stave churches in Norway which have existed happily on their own for 1,000 years. And timber isn't necessarily a material that requires so much more maintenance over time than other materials. If it's crazy to build a tall building out of a single pane of glass, single skin of glass, then it's maybe even crazier to build it out of 2 skins of glass in terms of the potential carbon wastage here, or carbon production, double skin facade. There are some environmental benefits, but I'm not sure they outweigh the carbon benefits of a double skin glass. There's a project in Europe, by the way, a high-rise project, where that double skin of unused space is 1.7 meters wide between inside and outside skin. But if we do believe that there's a potential for double skin facades in terms of natural ventilation and other things, then again, let's make it productive. Let's not waste energy, by creating blinds. Let's create facade farms in that space, because the vegetation wants the sun. It'll soak up the sun. The space becomes productive, and then there's the psychological connection that we've talked about between the internal occupants and the vegetation. Another huge potential for mass timber for us at the council is the potential to expand existing buildings. So this is maybe one of the best examples, an existing shopping mall, maybe a bit down on its luck, 2012, well, it got a new timber expansion, and arguably you could only do this in timber because of the lightness of that timber structure rather than other materials. Communal spaces in high-rise buildings, vitally important. This is not necessarily linked to timber, just, one of the big failings of high-rise buildings is the lack of communal space. Well, this was a project in Commerzbank in Frankfurt, which every single worker in this office building has direct access to a sky garden. Sky gardens in the, gardens in the sky. And again, that natural symbiosis with timber, with the vegetation in the sky gardens. So I couldn't find a timber project with a sky garden. Maybe there's one out there, but this is an interesting project where, because of the lightness of the structure, it's lifted up and creates more urban space at the ground plane, which itself is elevated, which is quite interesting. Almost finished now. The idea of communal space inside the buildings can be taken even further. I did my PhD on sky bridges, the potential for connections between buildings. And we're looking at a project here in Singapore, which, by the way, is government-built social housing. What a disaster that spells in so much of the world, government-built social housing. Here we've got 7-8 towers that are linked at 3 levels, creating significant urban habitat at height. You can see that here, social space, recreational space, jogging tracks, swimming pools. And here's another project in Singapore, the Interlace, which, just look at this image. Yeah, through combining the idea of vertical and horizontality, the developer here and the architect and the whole project team have managed to put 3,000 people living on this area of land and recreate the ground floor natural area 2 or 3 times in the sky. This is one of the ways to achieve density more sustainably into the future. That gets me on to one of my other hobby horses, which is about the roof of a tall building. The roof of the tall building, every single tall building that exists right now, the roof is arguably its most important, most valuable space. It's got the best views, the cleanest environment, it's outdoors, it's potentially plantable, it's brilliant. And what do we do with the roofs of most tall buildings? We fill it up with crap. We put the water tanks, the lift overrun rooms, the satellite dishes, we put all the crap up there. What a shame. You can see here, this project still has the lift overrun rooms, but they managed to create social space up there. And if we put together the idea of the roof and the sky bridge, then you get projects like this. Marina Bay Sands in Singapore, where literally you have created an urban park in the sky. So the final slides I want to show you, just to wrap all this together and to think how timber might play into this in the future, is reconsidering the vertical city. So United Nations showed that there are more than 1 million people urbanizing on this planet every week. Every week, more than 1 million people are either being born into cities or moving into cities for the next 30, 40 years. That means we need to build the equivalent of a Chicago every month as a species on this planet. So where do these people go? If they go in the horizontal model of development, urban development, then we at the council believe that is completely unsustainable because of the loss of natural land, well, the loss of land, the loss of natural land, the loss of habitat, but the energy to both create and operate such a massive horizontal city. So we believe that cities need to go vertical and more dense. So let's just imagine that. This is it's a hypothetical existing city of 1 million people, mostly low-rise or mid-rise. The colours here indicate infrastructure, and that's really important. The infrastructure. By infrastructure, I don't just mean roads and subways, mass transit, electric, water, sewage, power. I do mean all those things, but I don't mean just those things. I also mean social infrastructure, sidewalk, street, park, school, doctor's surgery. The whole embrace of social and physical infrastructure all exists at the ground plane. 99% of it right now in any city is at the ground plane. Well, this 1 million people is going to 10 million people over the next couple of decades. And that might sound like science fiction, but it isn't. That has happened and is happening in many cities around the world. So where do those other 9 million people go? Well, they can't go in the horizontal city. We can't expand that city by a factor of 10 because that's unsustainable in terms of the reasons I've said. So there's only one way for it to go, and there's the beautiful vision of the future. No, because those buildings are all completely isolated from each other, from the infrastructure, and by the way, residential, office, and hotel. I just described 99% of the white floor space that you were looking at there in the white high-rise forms. Well, a city is not just residential, office, and hotel. It's so many other functions. So that's not the way forward. And the way that we're thinking about buildings and cities of the future is that these tall buildings need to become almost like a part of that two-dimensional, infrastructure-rich plane, flipped vertical, with the infrastructure, with the sky gardens, with the schools and the doctor's surgeries, with the physical infrastructure up in the sky. And then with other buildings doing the same and bringing in the horizontal as well as the vertical, and that's where some of the infrastructure networks can come in as well. We have the potential for what we call sustainable vertical urbanism, where we've put 9 million more people on that plot of land, but we've brought the infrastructure and the support services up into the sky. And of course, it's a utopian vision, and many people will be thinking, well, how can this be delivered? Well, at the moment, how can it be delivered financially as well as logistically? Well, at the moment, who provides that infrastructure at the ground plane, including the parks and all those things? It's the government. And so in the future, this vision would need to be public-private partnership. The buildings themselves and the infrastructure in them would need to become public-private partnership, paid out of the 9 million more people that live there paying taxes. So it's perhaps not as far-fetched as it might seem. A closing thought as we wrap this up, just to bring it back to timber. And again, I want to reiterate the research project and other things that we've got going. If you want to get involved in this, and I hope you do, please contact us at the council and we can talk some more about that. A closing thought. In the time that we've been talking, plus another half hour, this project, the timber that went into this project in Vienna, Austria, the entire timber will have grown back in Austria's forests. And that is a pretty amazing data point for me to get back to how I started this presentation by saying that mass timber in the high-rise realm and for future cities is absolutely the game changer. Thank you.